7:31. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Tamsin. Kilts, right? Apparently I'm all right to wear a kilt. David says, I'm sure you have Scottish or Irish heritage somewhere that you can wear a kilt. If not, you could wear a non-clan one, like the Edinburgh tartan, or as you're from Cumbria, wear the Submariner's tartan.
Fantastic, David.
It's not a bad idea.
Brilliant. There you go.
Because they build submarines where I am.
Green light.
Pixie says, I'd love to bump into you wearing your kilt roaming the Scottish countryside. Pixie, behave yourself. And Andrew says, I'm an English Kiwi and wore a kilt at my brother-in-law's wedding in Dundee. There were lots of Swedish guests wearing a kilt as well.
Oh, look, here you go.
Bob
the Scot in Stamford. Of course you can wear a kilt, Stephen. Have a look at the Ramsey tartan. Absolutely beautiful.
Oh, right, I will. Well, Bob the Scot. So there you go, Bob. I'll take your word for it. Keep your thoughts coming through. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Right, let's take a look at today's front pages. The Times reports that Ukraine is prepared to use British long-range missiles to hit targets in Crimea, the peninsula annexed by Russia in 2014.
The Guardian has a story about a major upheaval in the view taken by the Church of England on same-sex marriage.
The Mail reports that the Treasury was under pressure to cut taxes last night after AstraZeneca criticised how expensive it was to do business in the UK.
The Eye has an exclusive revealing raw sewage from a major HS2 site is being pumped into a river.
The Express says anger is growing because greedy banks are refusing to pass on higher interest rates to savers.
Let's go through the papers now with the assistant editor of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald, and legendary broadcaster Liz Kershaw. Morning to you both. Nice to see you, Liz. Let's kick off with the Times, should we? And British long-range missiles, which may be used against Crimea.
First of all, you know the joke, don't you?
What?
Is anything worn under the kilt? No, it's all in perfect working order.
Oh, yeah. Very good, very good.
Yeah, I've got a kilt. I can wear the Wallace tartan because of my granddad.
Right.
Anyway, I remember my colleague at Radio 1, Bruno Brooks, once said to me, can't be doing with history, it's all in the past. But I think we can learn about it. So looking at the conflicts currently around the Black Sea, Crimea, etc., with the Russians and the Ukrainians. This is I was reading about this, and this is an interesting quote. War fever among the public in Britain and France has been whipped up by the press in both countries to the degree that politicians found it untenable to propose ending the war. Now, when do you think that was in a newspaper article?
No, that's Second World War, isn't it?
No. It's October 1953 to February 1856, the Crimean War, which was between Russia and the allies of the United Kingdom, France and the Ottoman Empire, which is Turkey. Topical because they're in grave trouble at the moment. But it was an absolute disaster. It was the first major war where really heavy artillery was used, you know, explosives, shells, rather than just rifles and, you know, cold steel up them and all the rest of it. But there were 450,000 casualties, and it really solved nothing. We've all heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade. And I just think we have to be really careful, because whilst we realise that it's morally and legally totally wrong for Russia to invade a sovereign country like Ukraine, for us to start sending long-range missiles, our planes, which Zelensky was asking for the other day, is a very highly dangerous move, I think.
Well, it did.
In escalating the extent of the war. I'm not ruling it out, like Rishi Sunak said, everything's on the table, but it's got to be a military, not a political decision, as per that headline in the papers.
Putin's already...
But, you know, Zelensky said, I'll thank you in advance for your planes. But we have very few fighter planes now.
We've got very few tanks. We're sending those.
Yeah, but you need very, very skilled people, trained for years to fly fighter jets.
This is the problem.
We can't send the Ukrainians our fighter jets and say, you Ukrainian lads can jump in and fly them. It takes years to train.
Well, this is it.
We've got to have RAF people willing.
No, we can't have people. We can't have our own people flying them. Training them we can do. But
yeah, but we can't have our own people going there.
No.
And would they be willing to do so anyway? So all I'm saying is, let's do it for the right reasons, which would be militarily tactical, rather than because it's out of sentimentality or misguided.
What do you think, Andy?
Well, I think, it's important that we show support and solidarity to Ukraine because they're in an awful situation. Russia are invading their sovereign territory. If that were to happen to us, we'd expect our allies across Europe and the West to support us. So, I think it's really quite key and interesting that MPs like John McDonnell and Nadia Whittome, who have been long-time supporters of the Stop the War coalition, have come out and said publicly, we need to support Ukraine. We need to send them the weapons, need to offer them the training, offer them the guidance. I think we do need to continue doing that, and I would encourage Rishi Sunak and the Defence Secretary and those in the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office to continue that support.
Yeah, well, if you've got a view on that, it'd be good to hear your thoughts. Can we have a look, talking of all things political, Andy, can we have a look at Dominic Raab? He's spoken in the Telegraph. I mean, he's made it clear, and it's an interesting point. He says, I'm not a bully. I've always acted professionally, but what I do insist on is high standards. Well, that's a fair point, isn't it?
Yeah, it probably is. This was written by Charles Hymas, the Home Affairs editor of the Telegraph. It's made the front page, and it's kind of just said he's just holding his civil servants to high standards, and it's actually quite reminiscent of the Dominic Cummings era when he was chief advisor, holding civil servants to high standards. But there have been kind of several complaints over several years. The FDA, trade union, have kind of highlighted this, and I would encourage an investigation, because if there has been a complaint, you've got to go through the due process, and I'm sure the Secretary Raab would agree with that. But he's the Deputy Prime Minister, he's the Justice Secretary. I wouldn't imagine that a man who has got this far in politics would have done so by playing dirtily with civil servants.
Of course, there have been calls for him to be suspended by the Prime Minister, but of course he wants to see this inquiry through, doesn't he, before he makes any rash decision?
Well, absolutely, because, you think back to the early 2000s, Peter Mandelson was fired before inquiry, and then he was cleared, and he never really made it back until another administration. But, yeah, I think Rishi Sunak has done the right thing by saying, we'll wait, we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, I'm reeling in shock from some of the allegations. Dominic Raab was guilty of long silences.
Oh. He threw a tomato at one stage, apparently.
Some of it's quite risible, but the interesting thing is, first of all, if you're in under pressure situation, and in media, I've seen it, you're the presenter. No, not talking about present company. And you're under pressure and it's egg on your face. There are all the stories about Susanna Reid on a rival station this week. You're going to kick off if people aren't feeding you the right stuff at the right time. If he's got to go and stand in the House of Commons in 15 minutes and he hasn't been given the facts to have at his fingertips, somebody might be a little assertive about that. So I think we have to wait for the inquiry to find out exactly what his behaviour patterns were like. But I would also like to share that I sat on the train yesterday coming to London with a woman and she was talking about her son trying to buy a house. And I said, what's he do for a living? He works in the Home Office. He's a civil servant, quite junior. She said he absolutely hates it because she said he just feels he can't speak his mind. There's a whole mindset of what she described as left-wing indoctrination. People don't feel they can have free speech. There's all sorts of training courses and woke stuff going on, and how to spot communism was something they had a talk on. She said it's just she feels there's a culture which her son can't abide, and he's not very political, that's sort of against the elected politicians.
Mind you, is that a surprise? I mean, I don't know, did you ever watch Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister?
I think it was a bit before my time.
A little bit before your time. But again, it was always politicians versus the civil service, wasn't it?
Well, that's always kind of the narrative that's been put forward for decades and decades. I don't know how true that is, but I think it's quite interesting that you say it's left-wing indoctrination, but they're being trained how to spot communism. It seems a bit oxymoronic, if you ask me.
Well, even
oxymoronic.
Yeah.
Hey,
Too early for a word
he's
like
a bright
that.
one, this one.
Can I just add finally that I think Dominic Raab is just the latest. I think there are people who are very disgruntled that their political careers may not have worked out, that Brexit won in the referendum, that the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. And I've said it before, as opposed to going through a democratic process to unseat them and to replace them with a Labour government, there's a campaign via the media to pick them off one by one, and some of them have been hopeless and deserve to go. But you know, the main figure was Boris Johnson. They unseated a prime minister, and there are people who work behind.
He unseated himself. He lied consistently to both Parliament and the public.
Right. Okay. Well, the public
violated.
him out.
He violated his own rules. You know, he's got only himself to blame. You know, you're saying that we're trying to. The Labour Party are trying to somehow replace the Tories. We're doing that at the ballot box. I mean, West Lancashire, we just decimated the Conservatives.
So you're represents the Labour Party.
I'm a member of the Labour Party.
Okay.
But yeah, the Labour Party are decimating the Conservative Party and all other opposition at every single chance they get. We don't need to try and adopt some kind of media narrative. We're doing it at the ballot box, and I look forward to these May local elections just to get that as a kind of dress rehearsal for the next general election.
Well, I don't think it's entirely just due to the Conservative Party's performance. There is a media campaign to unseat Conservative figures, and it's evident, it's there.
I just don't see it. I just don't at all.
Isn't it always? I sort of think, isn't it always the way that this? I mean, you know, if you live long enough, you know, there's always a whoever's been, especially when the government's been in for a long time.
Yeah, well, it happened to Margaret Thatcher at her own party.
Suddenly the sleaze sort of kicks in, all the allegations of sleaze. They all focus on one party and not the other, and and it is undermining, but it's just part of how we do things in this country.
Well, yeah, I mean, they unseated Margaret Thatcher, the Labour Party unseated Tony Blair. That worked out well, didn't it, for Gordon Brown? The public don't like to see people crowned. They want to see them elected. But I do think there's been a consistent campaign. And, you know, I've got my suspicions who are behind the scenes of all this, but I'm not going to say it for legal reasons.
No, please don't.
Well, the media are doing their job. They're holding the government to account. They're holding the elected members to account. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I mean, if it was a Labour government, I'd expect the very same.
Well, let them be held to account in the case of Dominic Raab when the inquiry, the independent analysis, has come to fruition. Because in this country, you are innocent until proved guilty. I don't know the man. I don't know if I'd like him or not.
No.
But I'm just saying, as trying to be objective, let's go through due process rather than let somebody, the mob, you know, get him in the stocks via certain newspapers.
Well, let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Can we just have a look? I know, Liz, you said, neither of you got a lot to say on this one, but nevertheless, I think it's important to mark. It's on the front of The Guardian this morning. Church of England priests will be allowed to bless the marriages of same-sex couples. This is really important, actually, if you're a Christian couple, isn't it, that you've got access to that?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I didn't say I don't want to talk about this because I'm not interested, or I don't want to talk about this because it's not important. I just think, well, what's not to like is my response. And as it's, you know, enshrined in UK law now, and the church, unless you're anti-disestablishmentarianist.
Oh, show off. Don't you start as well on that side.
Then the church, you know, who has the privilege of having bishops in the House of Lords, should be toeing the line and going along with the will of the people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not a member of the Church of England. I'm not a practicing Christian, but I think it's they do need to evolve. I mean, the popes evolve. The various popes over the last couple of years, or couple of decades, have evolved their positions on things like birth control, things like homosexuality, and I imagine that Catholicism will follow that trend, and I think the Church of England are evolving to survive, and it's very welcome.
Well, I don't know, us Catholics are a bit backward.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, that's for you to say. Lovely. Thank you, Liz, Andy. If you've got a thought on that, I just think I don't think any vicar's going to be forced to do it if they don't want to, but to make it available to those who want it, I think is
absolutely
sensible, isn't it? But let us know what you think. GBViews@gbnews.uk.